gentlemen, at 7:03 p.m. we're going to call to order the meeting of the Castle Hill Zoning Commission. We are meeting on Tuesday, March 5th, 2019 at 7 p.m. in the City of Castle Hill City Hall Chambers, 209 Lemonwood Drive, Castle Hills, Texas, 78213. Again, it's 7:03 p.m. That's item number 1, to determine a quorum, and we do have a quorum present. Seated tonight are Commissioners to my right, Aiken, Baker, Ray, Lynn, Chairman is Brand. Item number 2, discussion of possible action on the minutes of the December 4th, 2018 meeting of the Zoning Commission. Members, do you have any comments on these? Hearing none, I would like to ask Mr. Rapley, if city staff could just make one clarification on page 3 of these. It indicates that there are 4 pages to this section 3, and on the 3rd page, second paragraph, there's a statement, Commissioner Gray requested we review. Could we just clarify who we is in this case, which I believe indicates staff?
Yes, sir. That's the case.
Thank you, sir. With that one change, I get a motion to approve. Mr. Gray? Ms. Baker, all in favor? It's unanimous, thank you very much. I'm going to reverse the order on the next 2 and jump to item 4, and then we'll come back as part of that and open up a public hearing. But item number 4 is discussion of possible action on the recommendation to the City Council on an amendment to Section 50-1 of the Code of Ordinances to add a definition of impound lot and on an amendment to Section 50-388 of the Code of Ordinances to prohibit impound lots on the city. I'd like to ask city staff on this. We have background on the proposed resolution, and I would like clarification, Mr. Rapley, on how this item is coming before us tonight, please.
Yes, Commissioner. We had a request from a member of the governing body to have this amendment to the zoning. I consulted with council, and the process for conduit was to go through zoning initially and then back to city council. But we worked through the commissioner and the commission's desire on the process.
All right, so Mr. Rapley, the recommendation of the document forwarded to us then is at the request or at the behest of city staff.
Yes.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, let's go to, since we're in this, let's go ahead and go to item 3 as well. It's 7:06 p.m. and we'll open up the public hearing on a proposed amendment to Section 50-1 of the Code of Ordinances to add a definition of impound lot and on a proposed amendment to Section 50-388 of the Code of Ordinances to prohibit impound lots in the city. Before we begin to take public input on this, Commissioners, does anyone have any opening comments or thoughts they'd like to share? All right, hearing none, we will open this up then to the public hearing. Citizens to be heard. George Booth, Mr. Booth.
Let me go last, if you don't mind.
Okay. Mr. Smith, Jim Smith.
I was here about the short-term rentals.
Oh, okay. Ms. Allwine, Linda Allwine.
This would be regarding short-term rentals.
Okay, all short-term, okay. Is there anybody who would like to speak to the item that we have before us, which is related to the proposal for amendment of the Code of Ordinances regarding an impound lot? Mr. Gregory.
Douglas Gregory, 212 Briarcliff Drive. Over the last couple of years, the question of whether or not we should have an impound lot in residential areas has been bandied about in the city, but there has been no definitive determination whether it should be here or not. There are currently, I believe, 3 lots in the city that the city owns that are vacant, and they are all in residential areas. And I believe, and so do the people who live in those areas, that it would have a significant negative impact on the living in those residential areas. Impound lots, by their very nature, are loud. They have to have lights on for security during the night. And it is the impact, the long-term impact on residential values for those particular neighborhoods I cannot believe it would be anything but negative. As your city treasurer, I cannot imagine a scenario, if you, for example, you took Alamo Heights or us or anywhere else, if they decided to plop an impound lot in the middle of a residential area, it would be a long-term plus for that city. I believe very strongly, and so do a lot of the residents, that it would be a negative. I do not oppose the impound lot, though. I think an impound lot is a good idea if it's done outside of the city limits. Run by the police department, it could be done in no residential areas within the city, but they could buy land outside in San Antonio if they wanted to, and run it that way, if they wanted to run an impound lot. I've been really struck by how a lot of people were very, very fearful of this being put in their neighborhoods. It's not in my neighborhood, but one situation came up that I was thinking about as I drove over here. On 2 blocks away from me, there is a house that hasn't been lived in for years, but it's owned by somebody who lives in, I believe, they live in another city in the state. If that person so desired, they could tear down their own house and lease that lot to the city if they wanted to. And without a prohibition on this, there are now, I think, 14 homes within the city which have either been abandoned or nobody lives there. They're paying taxes on it. But if they might reach a situation that the owner says we might make more long-term money by simply tearing down the house and leasing it to the city for such purposes. I mean, I strongly urge you to do this so it can be brought before the city council and have further discussion. But the long-term economic benefit of the city, I believe, would be negative. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak to this item tonight, Mr. Booth?
Hi, George Booth, 124 Dogwood. I mostly agree with Mr. Gregory about what he said. I've gone to all 3 of the lots and looked at them, and there's homes all around each one of those, and it just doesn't seem feasible. We're already getting paid a little bit of money by having the wrecker that impounds and pay us, and for the additional costs you have for fencing, 24-hour disturbance, security, I just don't think it's really worth it. As far as having a city lot, I think we need to look and see how many cars we've actually impounded for the last several years and see if it's really economically feasible. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who would like to address this tonight? Yes, sir. Please come forward.
My name is Jim Smith. I live in San Antonio at 613 Oblate. I didn't come here to talk about this, but one solution you might have, I'm from Washington, D.C. originally, and we have Denver booths instead of impound lots. So you can't move your car. So that might be a solution to come up with, instead of having to tow someone's car and worry about getting vandalized and stuff like that, just put a boot on it and let them pay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Is there anyone else who would like to comment on this? All right. Seeing no one else, then we will close the public hearing at 7:12 p.m. We will continue on with item 4 and open it up to members. Is there a discussion on this before we entertain a motion? Mr. Flynn.
I just have one question. Wouldn't, if there's a residential lot that somebody wants to use in impoundment, would that need to be rezoned? So my question is, do we even need this change?
I'll defer to the city attorney for interpretation of that.
The short answer, I think, would be to use a lot in the A residential district for anything other than the enumerated uses like single-family homes and a few other things. It would require a special use permit, so it would come before this commission. But the ordinance, the resolution you have in front of you is a resolution that would prohibit any lot in the city from being used as an impound lot. Not lots designated in the A or AA or AAA or B districts, but any property in the city of Castle Hills.
Did I answer your question, Mr. Flynn?
Yes.
Anything else? Mr. Gray?
Well, I'm just curious, I don't know the extent of how big of a problem this is currently. And like you mentioned, Mr. Booth mentioned what the volume is of cars that are impounded. I just have no knowledge of that whatsoever. Is that a big issue for us?
Mr. Rapley, I guess that leads to a side question or an associated question. Is the city staff and or the police chief have a position on this, or can you enlighten us with some statistics to help us in determining this?
I don't currently have any statistics or data, but I can get that from the police chief. I can't speak on behalf of his position on this, but I can certainly get that information from him if necessary.
So this is more of a preventative measure to ensure it cannot happen ever in the city of Castle Hills, correct?
Yes.
Ms. Wicker, we closed the public hearing,
I
but,
just wanted to answer the question.
I'm sorry,
I haven't answered the question.
would you mind consulting with the city attorney on it and have him bring it to us? Thank you. Any other, while that's discussion's taking place, are there any other comments on this? Okay, Mr. Shaw.
Ms. Winger is advised that, the police chief has advised her that the city impounds up to 30 vehicles per month.
Do we, and I apologize that I don't know more about the purpose of impound lots, but is this a revenue issue? Is there, I think I'm struggling to understand that aspect of it. Mr. Rapley, are you able to help me with that? If we're impounding 30 cars a month, where are they going? And does it have any benefit or negative to the city to be involved in this action?
Again, that is revenue, but not sure total revenue from 30 cars a month. I'd have to get that information. And as far as where they're going, I'd have to find out exactly where the cars are being towed to. In this case, it's not just parking violations, it's obviously somebody who's pulled over and or arrested, and the cars are towed somewhere, but I can get that information as well.
And Mr. Eastman, I'll tell you that a lot of these impounds are people who, as Mr. Ratley just said, are arrested. If an officer stops someone on Route 410 for driving while intoxicated, that person is going to jail and that vehicle is going to impound.
Not in the city of Castle Hills, though.
Like Mr. Ratley, I'm not aware of what the city's policy is on that. Most cities, like Castle Hills, have a contract with a towing company that they'll contact the towing company. Usually the contracts that the cities have require the towing company to arrive in a very short amount of time, like 30 to 60 minutes, in order to get the vehicle out of the off the public highway. And they may be, that towing company may have its own impound lot. And that is likely what happens, but we have to ask Chief Siemens to get it confirmed.
So, Judge, I know what we're saying is that we impound a car, it leaves the city, and we make revenue off of that.
No, the impound lot makes the revenue off that. The towing company makes the revenue for both the tow and for the impound, and the city probably does get some financial benefit from that.
And Mr. Shaw, would you tell me again why, if someone wanted to do this, if someone wanted to convert a lot into an impound lot, the steps they would have to take? Because we already have zoning. We have the lots. What would someone have to do, even if it's the city, if they wanted to make it an impound lot?
Change that.
So it'd have to go back to us, really, that's what I asked.
If the use of the land in question, the zoning classification of the land in question did not permit the use of the land for an impound lot, then they would need to come in and have a zoning change. I can't remember now what category. I think it may be the H or G category. Probably the H category allows storage lots. An impound lot is just impound is another way a storage lot can be called. So at this time, in section 50-388, storage lots are permitted. And there's very little land, I think, in the city which is zoned in the H classification.
So are you saying if someone has one that's zoned like that, that they could in fact make it an impound lot without coming through the city or the zoning commission?
There's no zoning.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I'm trying to find the section now that
So it sounds like that's what we're trying to protect against, is that small amount of folks that could do something. 'Cause I'm not in favor of passing ordinances and things like that if they're not necessary. If we have fail-safe already in line or in place, or they have to come to us, you're saying that would probably be one of the only ways they could get around that issue, is if they're already zoned to do that, then they decide to do it.
Let me play devil's advocate here. If you're already zoned for storage lot, is it that much of a degradation of the property that had to be converted to an impound lot?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I think the issue, I was at one of the hearings they had when they first, the city first was presenting this impound lot scenario. And the police chief indicated that one of their rationales for it was that it might save police time. Because if you impound a car, an officer has to go with the car and take evidence, store, record, all that, and that takes time, especially if they have to travel at a distance. But the citizens that spoke were most disturbed by the fact that there will be backup beeping noises all night long, lights, and security. And if that's by your bedroom window, yes, that would be most disturbing. So those were the commentaries from most of the citizens at this first presentation for an impound lot. And as far as I understand, all the city-owned lots are in residential areas. If I don't know of any others that the city might own that aren't.
Well,
Those were the issues.
the city-owned lots are residential. And I can understand about putting an impound lot in a residential area and how to be a nuisance. But if you have a company that wanted to convert existing property to an impound lot and maybe pay tax or whatever to the city or, and that could be a source of revenue, and also create savings in the police department. I understand about not having impound lot, it could be unsightly, maybe, but you can also put fencing limits that you don't see the cars. So this language, if we adopt it, I want to be clear, would prevent that future use, which is, I think, pretty unlikely to begin with. So,
Well, I don't know how unlikely it is since the city wanted to do this.
well, but
Obviously, it was an
then
issue.
we're looking at residential properties that they own, not property that's already owned as a storage facility, storage H, so there's a difference. And that, I don't think any planning zoning commission say, yeah, we're going to rezone this residential property, put an impound lot at it here. I think that's a specific to consider. But to have a storage unit, that might be something the city might want to consider. I'm just throwing that out. I have no real strong feeling one way or the other.
What is our police department recommendation?
Apparently, we have not heard from the police department on this.
I haven't really conferred with the chief on it for him to get a position from that standpoint. I can discuss with them and get back to the commissioner and obviously the council at that point. And provide further details again about how the towing, we have a towing contract and there's a percentage and what that percentage is that we get to the city each year based on those cars. So again, there's other information I need to get. Again, if you want to have the chief here to do a position, we could have that from my standpoint. I talked to him and let him know that he wasn't needed here tonight as far as any questions related to an impound lot, since again, it's just a question of zoning or amending the zoning to it.
So we don't know if the chief is for it or against it.
No, I can't speak to his position
I think that's useful information.
Other discussion?
Can let me just ask for some clarification, and this dovetails on Mr. Fennel's comment, and thank you, Secretary, for our city attorney. The way the city ordinance is written now, if there were to be an impound lot in the city of Castle Hills, it has to go into an area that's, you said it was zone H or whatever it was you called it. Is that correct?
The H Special Business District, I'm looking at it now.
So we're talking about just trying to say we don't like impound lots and we want to not have them in the city of Castle Hills at all. Right now, they can only go into an H zoning area anyway. So if someone wanted to, and I presume this includes the city of Castle Hills, if we wanted to put an impound lot in a residential area, even if the city wanted to do that, the city would have to go before the zoning commission to get that approved.
Yes.
So, it seems like we're talking about we're just talking about, do we want to ban an impound lot from a zone H area? Isn't that all we're really talking about?
That's what it sounds like to me.
That's what that would be the result of it, yeah.
Right. Okay, let's, all I want. Thank you.
I think it's a little more than that, because currently, if there is no prohibition, then conceivably, anybody who owns a lot could come before zoning, and it could be approved. With the passage of this, you wouldn't be allowed to even ask for a rezoning, especially in a residential area. I don't know, Mr. Saul, would it effectively disallow even in a zone H?
If the resolution that's been presented to the zoning commission as part of your packet is adopted by the zoning commission, and then an ordinance is subsequently adopted by the city council that has the same language change, that would essentially mean there were no zoning districts in the city of Castle Hills where an impound lot could be located.
I would say this is probably a solution in search of a problem. I don't think there's a real demand for an impound lot. I think there's a lot of possibility. I think it would be extremely unlikely that anybody on the zoning commission would approve of rezoning of a residential property into an impound lot. So I think we're dealing primarily with these H-zone properties, and I think it's unlikely any of those would be used in impound lot. So personally, I think on the surface, it seems like this ordinance is not required. On the other hand, if we want to, prevent any kind of impound lot ever, which I don't think is a big demand for it anyhow, then I don't have a problem with passing this.
Mr. Rapley or Mr. Shaw, what areas of the city can you generally describe are H zoning areas?
Not offhand, I'd have to find out that information. I don't know exactly where they are H-wise.
And Mr. Israel, excuse me, I probably knew that when I sat in your chair as chairman of the zoning commission. I don't remember it now. I do want to correct one thing that I may have said in answer to Ms. Baker's question. If you adopt this resolution, and if the council then passes an ordinance, it would essentially mean there were no zoning districts where a impound lot would be located. But someone could petition the city zoning commission for a special use permit and try and see if they could get that. Again, as Mr. Flynn commented, it would have to come before this commission and would have to run the normal process for anything that comes for it, and a special use permit or a change in the zoning ordinance. So this action, if it were taken, would send a message that impound lots are not welcome in our city. But it doesn't prohibit someone from coming and asking for one anyway.
And would you clarify that if the city wanted to do this, they would also have to go before the zoning commission?
Yes, sir, they would. And then,
They
no matter
couldn't
what,
just go and do it because of the city. The city can do whatever they want.
no, the city, if it wanted to get this kind of a use of a piece of property that wasn't a use that was permitted under the current zoning ordinance, should follow that procedure of coming to the zoning commission. But whatever recommendation comes out of the zoning commission ultimately goes to the governing body. The governing body can accept your recommendation, or it can do something else.
I think, yes, I have a problem, Mr. Flynn, you've had this discussion on other meetings that we're passing something that, you know, we don't like impound lots. I don't like impound lots either, because my car's been one time, you know, it happens, right? Not because I was needed, I never had that, but it has been, you know, I was at a can learning function doing I'm gonna explain myself, doing a benefit, answering telephones. I guess I parked in the no parking zone, and I got out of the function at 11 o'clock, and my car is at the end of that lot. So my contribution to the city of San Antonio and KLR cost me $250. But that being said, I don't think I like us just banning certain businesses because we don't want them in Castle Hills. We seem to have fairly stringent laws right now. Even if we do this, whoever wants to impound lot can still come back and ask for a special use permit. I'm not sure I want to make a statement to all those people out there wanting an impound lot. I don't think the city of Castle Hills is going to make any money on an impound lot. I think the cost of, if the city wanted to do it, this came from the police department, I think we'd be hard pressed to make $1 when it's all over, so it just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
You know, we have an impound lot, some of these cars are wrecks, you know, so they can be pretty unsightly too. One benefit that we talked, you know, as you were talking, one benefit for having this ordinance, and then having somebody come in and try and get a special use permit. As it stands now, I don't know if there's any kind of, let's say a storage company wanted, somebody did want to put an impound lot on an H zone property. Do we have any standards for what an impound lot would entail? You know, because if you've got a lot of wrecked cars and they're on Northwest Military, they're kind of unsightly, and we don't have any kind of restrictions to block that view of those unsightly automobiles, I think that's problematic. I think if we said no impound lot, but then somebody came in with a special use permit and said, well, I'd like to have an impound lot, and this is what I'm going to do to mitigate some of those issues, I think that gives a little more authority on what you do. I can see the police department's point of view and the city point of view. If we had an impound lot here, that's going to say wear and tear on automobiles, it's going to say that's going to be more efficient. So that's a cost reduction. So, please save us big earn. So, those are just the issues I can see, pros and cons.
If anyone has good eyesight. Ms. Baker can point it out if you want, but then pass that around for.
That's the largest side we can pronounce.
Do you want me to pull it up on the, do you want to pull it up on there?
H is right next to the interstate of 410, right off west where the storage unit places currently are.
Since you, members, did you hear Mr. Raffles?
I did not.
Would you repeat it, please, Mr.
The
Raffles?
H is right along 410, just past also West Avenue, right near where the storage units are currently. That's the H.
Mr. Aiken, have you seen this yet? No, we'll send it down to you. Just before we move further, I want to make sure everyone has a chance. All right, so everyone's had a chance to look at it up here. Can you pass this back down here if any members of the public would like to see what we're talking about here?
You want to circle those,
Would you mind? Sure. We're going to give this a minute so that anyone who wants to take a look at this can.
Going back to my Boy Scout days, taking that.
All right, well, Mr. Aiken takes it down there. Is there other discussion, comments from the commission? Okay, hearing none. Our options this evening would be to, as asked, to adopt a resolution, to take no action, or to potentially table this item in lieu of receiving additional information. I, for one, wish the police chief were here. I would like to hear what the chief has to say, but it is certainly y'all's prerogative on what you would like to do tonight. So with that said, I'll open the floor here.
I'm in agreement. I'd like to hear what the police chief says.
I agree with that. I think
Yeah. Okay, so I think this would be a move to table motion until the next meeting if someone wanted to make that motion and ask the city staff meeting director to request the police chief's presence. So, no, I'm sorry, someone would have to make a motion first, Mr. Flynn.
No, it's not. I move that we table this, I move that we table this discussion until the next meeting with the director, staff have the police here.
All right, there's a motion. Is there a second?
A second.
There's a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, it's unanimous, Mr. Rapley. We do our next regularly scheduled meeting, ask the police chief to be in attendance as well. Thank you all very much. All right, we will move on to items number 5 and 6, and we're going to try to do these concurrently as well. We'll move up to item 6, discussion and possible action on a recommendation to the City Council on amendments to Chapter 50 of the Code of Ordinances based on recommendations from the Zoning Review Committee. Concurrent with that, I am going to open up a public hearing at 7:38 p.m. on item 5, public hearing and discussion on the recommendations from the Zoning Review Committee regarding revisions to Chapter 50 of the Code of Ordinances. The discussion will include home occupations and short-term rentals. Doing it this way so that as we go through the presentations that we'll hear tonight, the public will have the opportunity to ask questions or be a part of this process as well. So we'll start with item 6, discussion possible action. Commissioner Gray, Ms. Rappel, I believe you all have presentations you would like to present tonight?
We do.
If you would proceed, please.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Commissioner.
It was working.
Here we go. Thank you, Commissioner.
You have to hold it in your hand.
Hold in my hand. Sorry. Last meeting, I was tasked with to look at best practices related to short-term rentals and what other cities are doing and provide some examples and or definitions from other cities' ordinances. I met with Commissioner Gray to prepare for both of our presentations in preparation of tonight. As far as this meeting to inform, we advertised on this public hearing on this subject matter on our city website and Facebook and Nextdoor, so we can make sure that we had community involvement and people here to listen and provide any input on short-term rentals. Prior to the meeting, I forwarded y'all as commission a number of materials related to, I know that Commissioner Gray had requested some information from San Antonio. I reached out to a former colleague who worked on the ordinance there for San Antonio, and I know I've bombarded you with information from that standpoint, so if you need any more information or any questions, please let me know.
Ms. Rappel, can I just ask you here if it would be possible for public inspection to make a copy of those documents available at City Hall in case any members of the public want to see the items? Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, like I said, there were copies of the San Antonio ordinance, some best practices that they looked at other cities on what they were doing in relation to short-term rental and the process they followed to have a completed ordinance with San Antonio from that standpoint. As for this presentation, I researched other cities' ordinances, process related to regulating short-term rentals and highlighting the need to focus on occupancy, life safety, and parking standards. Those were some of the regulations and a number of the ordinances that were addressed in other cities. Generally, short-term rentals are defined as rentals as part of all residential structure for periods less than 30 days. Short-term rentals are subject to chapters 351 in municipal and 352 in county as far as tax code imposing hotel occupancy taxes. In this case, as what I found, is cities have options to not regulate short-term rentals and allow their unregulated use, prohibit the use altogether, adopt zoning regulations, adopt licensing regulations, and or a combination of zoning and license. As far as some of the items within this presentation I wanted to speak to was what is a short-term rental and why do we care? Potential impacts, both positive and negative. Current situation, Castle Hill Zoning Commission. Examples of what other municipalities are dealing with short-term rental. Some definitions and processes under those cities. And then some focus areas and possible next steps. As mentioned, short-term rental, residential property used for shorter than a month-to-month time period, less than 30 days. Can be an apartment house, portion of the building, or only a room. Can be owner-occupied investment property, not owner-occupied, a multi-unit with an on-site manager. Why does Castle Hills care? Short-term rentals are already here for owners and renters. This provides benefits to some in the community, but also has created complaints and enforcement actions. An increasing number of Texas communities have ordinances in place to manage local short-term rentals in terms of registration, location, property inspection, the collection of applicable hotel occupancy taxes, and other matters. While some communities have ordinances with moderate regulations in place, other cities are facing legal challenges to their local ordinances. The positives on the short-term rental, as far as what I found in other cities in research, provides choices for local residents, extended family, guests, friends, creates more option for business and other visitors, creates options for an increased income for homeowner, enhances the city as a destination when visiting San Antonio. I guess if you're looking at an Airbnb or something here in Castle Hills, more than likely you're here visiting attractions in the San Antonio area. So there is the benefit to sales tax locally here in Castle Hills. Potential for tax application and inspection fee revenues for the city. opportunity to bring regulation and predictability to customers, and creates a level playing field for those renting space. The negatives may reduce available long-term housing units, can increase rents and reduce the amount of affordable housing, potential for increased traffic and parking issues, community character impacts. Those are the things that, as far as issues with some of the research I've done in other cities with short-term rentals with noise, trash, transient use in residential areas. Safety concerns. A lot of the cities I looked at actually had life safety standards put in place for yearly inspections in relations to fire codes, egress, smoke alarms, increased staff resources required for review and inspection. Castle Hill's current situation, short-term rental is not defined in Castle Hill's zoning ordinance. Online services have led to the increase of home sharing, not only here in Castle Hills, but in the general area and state where short-term rentals are being used. It's a part of a sharing economy. HomeAway, Airbnb, VRBO are all the areas for renting a short-term facility or house or some type of place in a community. No current state or local regulations for STRs. Possible legislation in the current legislative session. What communities are doing? Some communities do not allow short-term rentals. Others have developed registration and permitting processes. They've defined the short-term rentals. They've looked at, like I said, life safety, health safety requirements, noise, traffic collection, registration or license requirement, and inspections. More specific restrictions options can include limiting the duration of stay or total number of days in a year, number of people or number of rentals in a dwelling unit, requiring owner occupancy as an accessory use, and defining where to allow the use, parking, and other zoning requirements. This is just a quick rundown, just at San Antonio, Austin. I picked Fredericksburg, New Braunfels, San Marcos, as far as currently have an ordinance in place, and they have a regulatory process. Grapevine recently banned short-term rentals, so I just use that example of the city. Here I've gone through, as I was tasked with from the zoning commission last time, was to find some cities with actual definitions in their ordinance. And I can go through. San Antonio is a short-term rental, is a property that rents out all or a portion of residential dwelling unit, apartment, condominium, or accessory dwelling, as each of the preceding is defined in the chapter. That's from the code there. For a period of less than 30 consecutive days and not less than 12 hours to a particular occupant, a short-term rental shall not be considered as a hotel, extended stay hotel, motel, corporate apartment, or bed and breakfast as defined in the chapter or the ordinance there. Regulation and permitting through the development services there, and they have two types of STRs, type 1 and 2, with a permit application process. New Braunfels, this is the definition from their ordinance. Short-term rental means the rental or compensation of 1 to 2 family dwellings, as defined in the IRC, International Residential Code, for the purpose of overnight lodging for a period of not less than 1 night and not more than 30 days. Other ongoing month-to-month tenancies granted to the same renter for the same unit. This is not applicable to hotels, motels, bed and breakfasts, resort properties, as defined in the ordinance, or resort condominiums. Permit application process here with operational requirements prohibits short-term rental in certain residential districts. Fredericksburg, short-term rental, this is the exact definition again. Privately owned dwelling included but not limited to a single family dwelling, multiple family attached dwelling, apartment house, condominium, duplex, mobile home, and or a portion of such dwelling rented by the public for consideration and or use for dwelling, lodging, and or sleeping purposes for any period less than 30 days. They have a permit application process with operational requirements. Castroville, they have an ordinance privately owned dwelling, including but not limited to single-family dwelling, multiple families attached, dwelling, apartment, house, condominium, duplex, and or a portion of such dwellings rented by the public for consideration without the use of the lease contract, and used for dwelling, lodging, or sleeping purposes, typically for a period of less than 30 days, consecutive days. This term shall be interchangeable with the terms bed and breakfast for the purpose of regulation. Again, permit application process with operational requirements. Waco, here's the definition. Short-term rental shall mean a residential dwelling units that be rented for out of compensation or temporary basis for a period of less than 30 days. requires a license application and review, life safety inspection required, and provides a schedule of short-term rentals by zoning districts. Gainesville, short-term rentals, the rental of a room, loft, or entire home for 30 to 180 days per calendar year to transient guests who have paid for accommodations. Here are established special uses and conditions for owner-occupied versus non-owner occupied. The short-term rental owners must submit an annual report accounting for the number of nights rented. I picked South Lake here because they do have, they ban short-term rentals. The rental of any residence, this is the definition, the rental of any residence or residential structure or any portion of residence or residential structure for a period of less than 30 days. City has a ban on short-term rentals. Ordinance to enforce penalty, $2,000 per day for an offense operating a short-term rental in the city. Possible focus areas and next steps, looking at impact on property values and safety, update codes, ordinances in other cities, hotel occupancy tax, establish revenue, defray costs for staff resources, options for registering and permitting, policies and procedures to enhance the public safety, public input and or survey of residents in regards to short-term rentals. As far as possibly some cities I looked at actually went through an online survey to canvass their community or residents to find out what their thoughts are as it went through the process through planning and zoning in those cities and eventually city council so they can hear from their residents and then obviously at some point the draft ordinance. At this point, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Gray.
Do we have,
Sure, why don't we break for 5 minutes?
now I'd like to ask Mr. Rattles a question before.
All right, so we'll recess here at 7:50, be back at 7:55.
That's right, you slide bills.
I didn't actually have the opportunity to introduce myself earlier. I'm Joe Isbreen.
I'm Jeanette.
Jeanette, it's
Yes.
nice to meet
Nice
you.
to meet you.
Thank you for your help this evening.
On that first motion, who seconded it?
Mr. Flynn
Flynn
made
made
it
the
and
motion.
Mr. Gray seconded.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure I have the note on there.
That is absolutely our goal.
I'm sorry, Scott. I was reading ahead. I saw my just babysitting. So we get it I didn't care. I just didn't.
Really?
No, he is, professionally, if you will, he's doing and the secret is Yes, to do it well, actually requires a little bit of setting. He absolutely loves it. It's full-time, great, it's James. There. The someone that loved it. One of my clients. Oh, okay, okay. Okay, so the son-in-law. He was very confused. See what happens in the city. It was so funny because the other day he passed home and was thinking about a new car and he said, and he goes, you know, I always look for it. Oh, yeah. He didn't even know what it was. Yeah, I said,
Yeah. Awesome.
Yes. He's still in that. He wasn't nice, but he's just not a Boston. So. That's the thing. Mandatory training for about 2 hours with every single month. Every single month. Yeah. What it cost you? The other big
Clearly, this article says, the lose if you research it, grapevines, it has legal challenges. And so, I mean, I pulled so many resources, so many documents together, I finally went, I had enough. Look, I learned more about short-term rental in the last week than I ever wanted.
For those of us who are still like printing photographs, you don't have to do stuff like that.
There would be so stressed, just like any other permanent process, the plan would do it. And then, making sure you'd have Louis out there. But that's what we're
Mr. Gray.
Yes, I
All right, thank you all very much. It's 7:59, we're back in session on items number 5 and 6. Yeah, Mr. Gray, before you begin, I believe Mr. Flynn.
Mr. Ramsey stepped out, but he'll be back shortly. Went back.
Okay. Well, Holly, you want Mr. Gray?
Oh, it's good, yeah. Well, here you go.
Okay.
Mr. Adler, I have 2 questions.
Yes, sir.
One, can you explain to me, and everybody here, what is meant by operational requirements on the permit?
That's like, for instance, I think I put that for New Braunfels, where they have a checklist.
Okay.
So when you go through the application process, there's requirements that they have that you have to check the boxes for, whether it's parking, life safety matters, those kind of things. That's what I meant as operational requirements. So there's a plan review portion that they evaluate as far as your application. And I think you'll see it in Mr. Gray's presentation, because he provides an example of New Braunfels application there, if I recall.
Okay, and the other question I had dealt with, Grapevine and South Lake had bans on there, on short-term rentals. And from the legal decisions that Ms. McClendon sent out before that would seem to be problematic under state law. So I'm curious as to how, and maybe you don't know, but I'm curious as to how they're doing that and and if there are any legal ramifications of their ordinance.
I'm not sure on the legal ramifications. I just reviewed, there was an article from the mayor there in Grapevine that kind of explained sort of the rationale and position of the city, why they decided to do that.
Okay.
I did find some of their facing legal challenges as well.
Yeah, 'cause what I read is one, it may constitute illegal taking. And also, state law tends to favor property rights and the free use of property.
And I think in the article, if I recall, he alluded to property rights as far as the position, but I'll have to look at it again.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
I was asked at our last meeting to put some thought into and do a little bit of analysis and research in this area, which I was not very familiar with. Now I'm pretty familiar with it. It's pretty amazing when we see. So what I'm going to do is give you a little bit more information just about short-term rentals in general. You know, what they are, what they mean. I'm not going to read you a definition of it. But there was an article in the Express News paper here just very recently. It was really well done, I thought, by a guy named Russell Withers. And I know that's going to be hard for you all to read back there, but I'm going to kind of paraphrase it with you. But this article was really well done. And it talks about local control is often the argument used when a lower level of government disapproves of what is being imposed by a higher level. But the purest form of local control is one's ability to use his or her own private property in the way they see fit. I think that's a very important point. In an ironic twist, under the guise of local control, local governments across Texas continue to curtail the right to use one's own property for the commercial gain available through utilization as a short-term rental or property. Now, according to this statistic, there are properties for rent in more than 200 countries and roughly 35,000 cities. I actually care about one of those cities, and that's one that we have to be standing in. In Austin, they have over 300 options, as well as $30 per night, up to $3,500 per night. Homeowners have rented out their own property since the genesis of private property, But short-term rental services have organized these into a way that allows owners to maximize extra income opportunities of their homes to the benefit of tourists, travelers, visitors, etc. Oops, sorry. So short-term rentals have caused a disruption in the marketplace. I think we all know that. That's why we're talking about it today. They compete directly with hotels by offering comfortable homes at reasonable prices. And we don't really have hotels in the city of Castle Hills, but there is something called a HOT, hotel occupancy tax, and we'll talk about here in a few minutes. Now, there have also been complaints from other homeowners that visitors in neighboring short-term rental properties can be loud and disruptive. This was one of our big issues we talked about at our last zoning meeting. And while the degree of the problem is overstated, which I agree with, it merits a legitimate complaint when strangers cause a disruption in a family neighborhood. City governments have responded to these complaints by imposing burdensome ordinances. Now, there's type 1, there's type 2, but there's owner-occupied and non-owner-occupied. In Austin, in 2015, put a moratorium on type 2 short-term rentals and basically took the rights away. And there's some issues because of that, some legal issues that are happening right now. So the question is, what should we do? Well, this thing goes fast. How should we treat short-term rentals? Well, we treat a short-term rental the same way we do any other home within the city of Castle Hills. What does that mean? That means reasonable restrictions on excessive noise and ensuring the safety and legality of gatherings. Short-term rentals should not be given any special treatment, but they should not be singled out for special scrutiny. These are residential homes and they should be subject to the same rules as other residential homes. So now, what about the legislature? There's a lot happening right now, and with all the talk of local control coming from the cities and counties, it's interesting that the Texas legislature will likely step in to restore local control to property owners under the regulatory thumb of those local governments. Now, in the last session, there were two bills, Senate Bill 451 and House Bill 2551, would have prohibited local governments from effectively eliminating short-term rentals. So you're starting to see a trend as to what's happening with legislation and enforcement and compliance. So there's a group called the Texas Conservative Coalition Research Institute's Free Enterprise Task Force. And their recommendations were pursuing legislation to protect the right of property owners to rent out their homes under a light-handed state regulatory framework, one that supersedes a patchwork of onerous local regulations. And it's unclear what form legislation on this issue will take in the 86th legislative session upcoming. It's coming, though. The cities have once again forced the legislature's hand on restoring local control to its rightful place. Now let's talk about current court actions and past court actions that have happened or are happening. This is right down the street from us. This is Timberwood Park, San Antonio, Texas area. Kenneth Tarr versus Timberwood Park. Well, the court's ruled, this is the Texas Supreme Court, ruled in favor of Tarr in May of 2018. Wow, that's not that long ago. And this gentleman, Mr. Tarr, was paying state-mandated Texas hotel tax, which is different than the HOT, the hotel occupancy tax. So this gentleman knew what he was doing when he was paying taxes. Well, he actually had to move out of state. And he ended up renting his house. He formed an LLC and started renting out the house. Well, short-term rental does not apply to the single-family residence, and instead, they rendered the tract commercial. Well, what the Supreme Court said. They said the summary judgment for the Homeowners Association was improper and reversed the decision. Again, going back with the property rights of the homeowner. Here's another one. Shack versus Raub and Property Owner Association, and this was in Corpus Christi, Edinburgh Court of Appeals through the 13th District. The Shacks, a family, sued the homeowner, Mr. Raub, and the Property Owner Association of Sunset Bay, Corpus Christi, for allowing Raub to rent his house utilizing VRBO, Vacation Rental by Owner. Well, the Court of Appeals ruled in favor of Raub and the Property Owners Association. There's a lot more detail behind all of this if you care to see it. That would be the information that Chairman Israel asked me to have available to anyone that's interested in it. All right, here's another one. Craig and Tammy Zagabay versus NBRC Property Owners Association. This went to the Texas Court of Appeals, the 3rd District in Austin. Again, summary judgment in favor of the POA was reversed in favor of the homeowner. So again, I know I'm glossing over a ton of details here, but I want you to see the trends of what is happening. When we talk about the Wasson interest versus the city of Jacksonville, Texas, Court of Appeals of Texas in Tyler, now in this case, the court affirmed the trial court's judgment in favor of the city. Now the reason that happened, this is a different situation. The land in question was on the city reservoir, therefore the city had greater control over leasing. That makes sense in this particular case. Now let's just go down the street here, the city of San Marcos, and this is paraphrased. You have to register your home. Only a permanent resident or long-term renter can register a short-term rental. Must present proof, a warranty deed or a valid long-term lease. There's an application fee that has to be renewed annually. They have to pay the hotel occupancy tax. Must list city registration number on all advertisements. No more than one short-term rental for applicant property. Maximum of 2 adult guests per bedroom plus an additional 2 adults. Must have a brochure including emergency information, contact information for local responsible party when permanent. Let's go to New Braunfels real quick. They have a filing fee, they have an application fee plus a technology fee, which is really to reimburse staff for what they're doing. You have to provide a sketch of a floor plan, a sketch of the required parking. You have to provide a legal description. If you're in the NBU, New Braunfels Utility Services area, you will be reclassified as commercial versus residential. That will not apply to us in our particular case. There's an annual fire inspection. There's an immediate inspection if there's a violation that occurs. You must provide a 24-hour point of contact that your city can contact if there's an issue. And if your permit is revoked, you go into a 12-month dark period, you can't do it again. Now, our friends up in the city of Austin, they always like to do things a little bit differently than we do. They passed one of the most aggressive sets of regulations that has been seen. And constitutional challenge is pending before the 3rd Court of Appeals in Austin. I don't believe there's been a decision rendered on that. If I was a betting man, I would bet they're going to side on the side of the homeowners' property rights. City Council has attempted to characterize the challenge law as nothing more than an anti-nuisance provision aimed at quelling loud parties and increasing available housing. Renters must be asleep by 10 p.m. They are also subject to warrantless searches. City research shows that short-term rentals generate fewer nuisance complaints than long-term rentals. Now think about that. Long-term rentals are creating more problems than short-term rentals. It's understood that a certain portion of the population is opposed to short-term rentals. We know that. But constitutional rights are not subject to the arbitrary whims of the public. I love that. Short-term rentals have been a part of Austin since the 1800s. It's been around a long time. Given the lack of harm, the fact that neighbors may not like short-term rentals is not a constitutionally permissible reason to ban them. Now remember, I'm saying all this for a reason. It's called precedence, right? The Texas Supreme Court has explained it is a doctrine not to be tolerated in this country that either state or municipal authorities can, by their mere declaration, make a particular use of a property a nuisance, which is not so, and subject it to the ban of absolute prohibition. All right, now here's some other cities and other states. Charleston, South Carolina. Short-term rental rules include a requirement that property must be owner-occupied, that the rental include no more than 4 adults, and the owner has to provide site plans to the city that outline where people will stay or park their cars. Nashville, Tennessee. Investor-owned short-term rentals are being phased out, with investors being given 3 years to stop their operation in residential neighborhoods. Owner-occupied short-term rentals are still allowed, as are rentals in commercial districts, including downtown. As Tennessee's most lucrative tourism market, the newspaper reported the January vote was a big deal for Nashville's neighborhood groups and why Airbnb has fought so hard to stop it. By the way, I've spoken to Airbnb. I've spoken to VRBO. I have spoken to HomeAway, to their corporate offices, and I've also talked to their lobbyists in the state of Texas. And Castle Hills is just a blip to any of these organizations. We don't have a huge number of them happening right now, so they don't really pay much attention to us. If you look at Savannah, Georgia, short-term rentals that are not owner-occupied are subject to a 20% cap in each of the city's 28 wards. That includes owner-occupied properties. And Savannah is unique in having legalized short-term rentals before the rise of online platforms like Airbnb. Okay, so that's kind of the facts, that's the background, that's what's happening in other places and what's happening in the legislature. Here's what I want us to consider, a few things. We need to differentiate between whole house rentals and single room rentals, right? There's the type 1 and the type 2. Now, obviously, if you're doing a hosted sharing, that means it's actually occupied by the owner. That means you're renting out a room in your house. That's allowed by right in residential and commercial. Type 2 is the unhosted sharing. The owner and lessee do not occupy the property as a primary residence. It's allowed with special exception in residential and allowed by right in commercial. It's my understanding that the type 2 is this one situation we had over here by the church, I believe. I heard that's being resolved, or the person's leaving or selling. I'm not clear on what's happening. Now, what is our responsibility as the zoning commission? We need to remember that we're here to serve the homeowners, which means limited government. Our primary responsibility is the health and the safety of our residents. We also need to be able to use resources that we have within the city to ensure compliance. We don't want to subject ourselves to unnecessary and in some cases embarrassing litigation. We have no HOT, we talked about that a minute ago, the hotel occupancy tax at Castle Hills, but there might be a mandated Texas hotel tax, even if we don't have a HOT. My research showed that there's a Texas Tax Code Chapter 156 that would, that's what happened to this guy in Timberwood Park. That's how he was able to show that he was doing everything in accordance with what the regulations were. And I'm not a tax person, I'm not an expert at all, but it's my understanding that if we do something, that we might be able to implement a hotel occupancy tax that could benefit the city of Castle Hills. Not a huge revenue maker, but it's my understanding that might be a possibility. I'd have to defer to tax experts for that. Enforcement, that was our big discussion last time. Well, that's why we have a police department. Castle Hills Police Department and Code Enforcement, their job is to respond to complaints. Their job is to enforce proposed and existing city ordinances. I believe we have a nuisance ordinance in place today. Remember what I said earlier, you treat an Airbnb house the same as you treat my house. Same rules. Relay enforcement data to building officials, and again, with a strike-free or three-strike process, repeated violations will result in revocation of permits. So like I said a second ago, this should not be looked at as a large revenue generating thing, although it can. We want to offset any cost that it costs the city to enforce these policies and procedures. We need to establish some sort of a registration process, in my opinion. Most of the favorable policies that I've seen are even the city of San Antonio, I think is a little onerous for us, but I think it's very well done. That's what all of the lobbyists and all of the Airbnb, VRBO, and other organizations said. The city of San Antonio got it right. They had a lot of input, they had a lot of public meetings, a lot of discussions and collaboration, and came up with their policy. Well, I still think it's too much for us at this moment. We need to use our police department and code compliance to enforce the law. All right, guess what? We got the recommendation. So, my recommendation is follow New Braunfels. If you haven't seen their policy and their procedure, it's pretty well done, I think. And I think it captures the essence of the concerns that we have all talked about and what we're interested in doing in terms of how do you deal, because it's here. I mean, it's not coming, it's here right now. You saw the state doesn't have something. Well, they're gonna come out with something, we need to make sure that what we do is smart, and what's in our best interest of our city, without spending a whole ton of money to have to enforce everything. So there'll be a fee imposed to offset the cost, annual renewal would be required. People that are applying would have to submit sketches of your floor plan, sketch of required parking, a legal description, and again, this is what New Braunfels does today. There's an annual fire inspection. Well, we've got to offset that cost. It's my understanding that we know that our fire chief knows what it takes to go to a home and perform an inspection and what the costs are for that. So we need to make sure we roll that in to whatever these fees would be. You still have to provide a 24-hour point of contact. And again, 3 strikes, you're out for 12 months. You can't read this at all. This is just the application permit for short-term rentals from the city of New Braunfels. And then they go into a bunch of definitions of how you complete the application, what the fees are, if there are utility rates, because that's back to NBU, which we would not be concerned about. And then you have to provide the legal description, the sketch of the required parking, a sketch of the floor plan. And you can see this is an example of a floor plan you would turn in. We all have them. And then this is a plat of the property that we have. Let me see. That's a site plan. And that's it. So if you have any questions, I'm delighted to answer them if I can.
All right, Commissioner Gray and Mr. Rathway, thank you both very much for the work that you've invested in trying to help inform this matter for us. I'm going to open it up first to the commission members if you have any initial questions, and then we'll open it up to the public as well. Are there any?
I do have one question.
Mr. Flynn.
I was not here on last month, and I apologize for that, but I just wanted to clarify. The slide here says Castle Hill Zoning Commission recommendation. Did we reach that recommendation, or that's Scott Road?
That's a Scott Road.
Okay, I just want to clarify that. Thank you.
You should take that apart, though.
I noticed your presentation was totally unlocked.
I do have one question, Mr. Gray. It appears to me to be an assumption that we must do this or face the ominous implication of litigation. So how do places like Grapevine and South Lake, which are the 2 examples that Mr. Rathway used, how do they manage to get around all this?
You first.
Well, my response is there's going to be litigation.
Okay.
That's my guess. I'm not an attorney, I'm not a legal expert. My guess is that there's litigation happening in Austin at the state level and through many, many cities. And not just in Texas.
But those were in cities that already permitted short-term rentals.
That's correct.
Which is different than Grapevine and South Lake, which prohibits them.
Right.
Yeah, I reviewed the legal decisions that you referred to, and it seemed like the litigation was the result of ambiguity in the restriction covenant, and in the case of Austin, outlined constitutional requirements. But it also, and that's why I asked Mr. Rathway what about South Lake and Grapevine, they prohibited, and they prohibited any kind of short-term rentals. And he didn't, he wasn't sure, so I understand. My impression is that there probably will be lawsuits, because if you read those decisions, Texas law defers to free use of property and maximizing the use of property and individual property rights. So it's a matter, it stands to be seen whether those restrictions stand up.
Mr. Shaw, you comment?
I think that what Mr. Flynn and Mr. Gray said, I pretty much agree with most of that. The cases that Mr. Gray cited, except for the one case where the city owned the reservoir, were all cases involving homeowner association deed restrictions and the wording of those deed restrictions. And as you could tell, there was one case where the most of the cases, the homeowner won, but there was one case where the HOA won. And that was because of the wording in the HOA's deed restrictions. So the court was respecting the private developer's language in writing the deed restrictions that apply to that subdivision of that community. I do agree, however, that the trend looks like if a case were to come to the Supreme Court, like the City of Austin case, which first has to have an opinion from the Third Court of Appeals in Austin, the likelihood is that the Supreme Court will, more likely than not, allow short-term rentals. But the two communities that have banned them, that whose names have been mentioned, probably have not been challenged yet. And it may be for the same reason that Mr. Gray said when he talked to the Airbnbs and the VPROs and the home away people and their lobbyists, that Castle Hills is a blip, because we just don't have the population and the number of homes participating in their programs. I did want to clarify one other thing. I checked this afternoon, and as of this afternoon, about 2 o'clock, there were no bills filed in the current session of the legislature that would impact directly short-term rentals. There is one bill that was filed yesterday that clarifies some matters about the collection of the home occupancy tax by folks who are involved in short-term rentals. But it does not at all address whether short-term rentals are permitted or not permitted. The two bills Mr. Gray cited were introduced in last year's, or in the 2017 legislature. Neither passed, I don't think either of them passed either house, but one of them the House bill may have passed the House. But they died when that legislative session ended. Those bills to this date, this afternoon, have not been reintroduced. The deadline to introduce bills of that kind is, I believe, 11:59 p.m. on Friday of this week. So there's 3 more days that someone could introduce these bills. But usually, the sponsor of a bill who didn't get it through the previous session files it as a free bill well before March 8th deadline for filing bills. So we may not get any guidance. I think guidance from the legislature would be invaluable, but I don't think the commission is going to get that guidance. I've stood before this commission as the chair of the zoning review committee, which recommended the prohibition of short-term rentals in most of our residential districts. I was impressed by Mr. Gray's presentation and by his use of the example of New Braunfels, and that may be good instruction for the commission to follow.
All right, thank you, Mr. Schoen. We're still in our public hearing, so let's give the members of the audience the opportunity to speak here. So going back to the list and starting at the top again, Mr. Booth, did you want to comment on this as well?
I do.
Please.
Hi, George Booth, 124 Dogwood. I want to refresh you. The last time I was here, I spoke about this. At one point, we were discussing, or I was commenting that they weren't allowing home-owned or owner-occupied homes to be in this program, and I think that's definitely wrong. And I'm glad to see that a lot of other cities are allowing that. I don't want to see the homeowners that are allowed to do this saddled with a lot of fees, even though I do understand the reason for the inspection. Hopefully it'll be around $100 or so, because the idea is for homeowners to possibly make some money to supplement their income or their retirement or whatever the situation is. I don't have a unit for rent at this time. Don't know if I'll ever do it. We have a little unique situation because we have an outer building that could be rented, or I can move in there and rent the house. My situation's changed since Mom's passed, and I don't know what I'm going to do. But in any case, I don't think the home should be limited to only a 30-day rental. That's not short-term to me. I think, most of the Airbnb programs, HomeAway, and are probably on 1, 2, 3 days, short-term maybe up to a week. Occasionally you might find somebody that rents for 2 weeks. So I would like to think that y'all would allow the shorter-term rental rather than a 30-day mandatory rental, as y'all had discussed previously. Anyway, that's about it. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jim Smith. I live in San Antonio at 613 Oblate Drive. I wanted to come here tonight because I own 5 short-term rentals. I have a type 1 because I live in a duplex, and I have 4 type 2. 4 others are type 2s. I've been in business since 2007. I've been paying hotel tax since day one. I'm probably the only person I know that was doing that. Over the last 12 years, I've had over 1,800 sets of families stay in my homes. San Antonio decided to, because Councilmember Gallagher had a person complaining in his district and decided to issue a request from City Council to Development Services to look at this problem. They were going to ramrod this on March of 2017, and I kept, being a disruptive person at that time, yelling out task force. After about 30 yells, Director Shannon, who I know personally, stood up and said, "Jim, you have your task force." We met with 32 people, 16 people represented the neighborhood associations, and 16 people represented the platforms and owners. I want to point out a couple of things. I also brought a copy of the ordinance for everyone here, this on the dais, and gave them to Mr. Gray, so you can look at that and study that. What I would ask you to do is a couple of things. One is, if you decide you're going to regulate short-term rentals and come up with an ordinance, it would be very helpful to try to parrot some of the language in the San Antonio ordinance, because there's going to be a lot of overlap that might happen, like I might decide to do a short-term rental in Castle Hills. And we don't need to have 5,000 different regulations to worry about. It's better to be on one solid course. I think that the San Antonio model will be what the state will probably adopt at some point. Some people say, well, you're going to have a bad actor. If you're on a platform, they have reviews. I cringe at my reviews sometimes because a lot of times they're not warranted, but we're kept under control by our reviews. Because if someone writes a 2-star review or a 1-star review, your income falls down into the pit. If you have 5-star reviews, you stay occupied. 4-star reviews, you stay occupied. 3-star reviews, maybe. 2 or 1s, you're out of business. The other thing is, there's a difference between tenants and hosts. There's a difference between tenants and guests. I don't have tenants unless they rent for 30 days or longer. If a tenant is noisy and they're making lots of disturbances or disruptive behavior, what is the landlord to do? The landlord has to go to landlord-tenant court, wait a month or so to hear the case by a judge. The judge may not do anything about it. They might do something about it, but you don't have any control. If you have someone who's a guest and they stay less than 30 days, then if they violate any of my regulations, guess what? Take a hike. They do not have any right of protest. They don't have any, unless they sue me in civil court. There's no landlord-tenant court because they are lodging guests. If they destroy my property, I can actually go in and lock them out and seize their belongings for liquidated damages in Texas. So there's a lot to be said about the ability to operate short-term rentals that are positive. We keep our houses up better than most homeowners and certainly better than long-term tenants because we have people paying a great deal of money. Finally, I would like to suggest, as Mr. Gray suggested, that San Antonio requires a 9% hotel tax, and that pays for earmarked funds like the Riverwalk, the Freeman Coliseum, AT&T Arena, and a number of other things. The Riverwalk wouldn't exist right now in its current form if we didn't have our hotel tax. To be fair and competitive, It would be nice if you could have some kind of hotel tax for the city of Castle Hills, and I would suggest 9%, because that's what the million people all around you in the city of San Antonio are required to pay should they decide to do this. It's food for thought. The other thing is, we decided to charge one, in the House bill in 2017 that did pass with Dyer, they recommended a $100 fee. So we came up originally with $300 for a 3-year permit, but because we decided in the task force that we could self-certify, and the city council agreed with our fire requirements and stuff, so they don't have to hire extra inspectors, but they can inspect us at any time. But the initial inspection is self-certified. So in 20 minutes, I registered all 6, including my house, 6 rentals. I registered, it took me 20 minutes. I was surprised. I called up Director Shannon, I said, wow, I can't believe that I can do 6 properties in 20 minutes. So I think that this is the coming trend. If anybody has any questions or wants to look at any of my rentals and see what I've been up to for the last 12 years, I'll be glad to show you. But I have never had any citizen complaints whatsoever about any of my rentals. And I've only had one police incident where someone tried to kick a door in, and the people called the police that were there, and they were scared to death, and they moved out and demanded their money back. So I don't know why at first I didn't want people to regulate when it wasn't necessary, but then I saw there was a lot of bad actors. So I actually support and believe in regulation for short-term rentals. And I look forward to, if Castle Hills adopts it and I decide to do that, I would rather come here with an ordinance than to come here without an ordinance, because the people without an ordinance will not pay the state tax of 6%. If you pass a hotel tax, they will not pay that either. They're skirting the law. And it makes it difficult for people like me who pay our tax it's disparaging, because right now in San Antonio, the total tax is 16.75%. So if I rent a house and Airbnb has a bunch of people that don't pay tax, I've got to drop my fee 34%, because my income is 34% less because I pay tax. So even if I match their price, I'm losing 16.75% as opposed to the guy that's not registered. So I hope that you look at this very carefully and you consider doing it. If you decide not to do it, that's fine. We might have a problem later. But if you decide to do it, it's a good thing, and it's the way the trend is going. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, and thank you for sharing your insight with the city of Castle Hills. Ms. Albright?
We're a team.
And this is great. Looks like a great team.
I'm Linda Allwine, this is my husband Richard. We live at 311 Caladium.
Yeah, Joe, just the microphone.
We live at 311 Caladium. We have a short-term rental located at 309 Caladium. We pay our sales tax, we pay our hotel tax, and we are very discriminating in the people that we allow to stay at this property. We screen them to the best of our ability. We rent to families. We ask who's coming, why are you coming, and when you arrive, we meet you at the door. Our bedroom window looks at the front door. There's nobody going in and out that we don't know. My kitchen window, I can see in the next door kitchen window. I know when they get up and make coffee. We've never had a police show up. We've had a number of people stay, we still correspond with. We have never had the police come. We've never had any complaints from our neighbors. We have had a number of citizens rent the house for their relatives. So I know my neighbors support this. We would love to do this with the proper permits. We have many people that come and say they love this city and they enjoyed how quiet and residential area this is. They feel very safe and they have enjoyed San Antonio and Castle Hills. So we would like to do this in the proper manner and with your permission and with the proper permits. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to add a couple of things. When we redid the house and we decided we would try this short-term rental business, we did things like we put in fire alarms with carbon monoxide detectors. We have little emergency lights scattered around the house for the protection of people. Linda has a set of house rules that she has posted on the web that we use, and she reiterates these to the people when they call. They can do an inquiry just to see if it is available this date, or they can do requests, which means we want to come on these times. She'll go back over those with them, and some of those are no more than 6 people in the house. You're not sleeping on the floors, you're not sleeping on the couch. We have room for 6 people to sleep in beds. No smoking, no pets, no parties. Our property sits back here on Caladium. Our driveway is very long. I don't think we've ever had it full. Most people coming in use Uber or taxi, or they rent a car. We have on occasion had some folks from town that had relatives staying with us because it was convenient for them to visit back and forth. And so they would come over and there'd be a little bit more, few more people in the house, but they went home before bedtime. We're not peeping Tom. She said we could look in the windows. We don't look in the windows. We do not look in the windows. They know we're our presence. We've made some wonderful friends. We've had people that now are coming back for the 4th and 5th time. We have a family from Plano. Their son came down. They came down here looking for a college. They found Trinity. They've been back 4 times now to visit him and so on and so forth. I think, and their comments were how they feel so safe, so secure in our neighborhood. It's quiet, it's peaceful, and they feel very comfortable. I think that might have a little bit of influence on where the boy went to school. Maybe I'm just getting big-headed about it, but I really believe it might have helped. We've had a lot of Air Force, a lot of people with Air Force relatives graduating from Lapham come in for their graduation. And they're just really nice people. We have to tell ourselves they didn't come to see us, because we're having so much fun spending time with them. And it's really an enjoyment for us. And we have quite an investment in the house, not only financially, but sweat equity. We put a lot of work in that place. Mrs. Severo passed away in 2012, and we bought it in 2014. And finally finished in 2016. And believe it or not, one of the first groups we had come in there were 2 people in it who were native San Antonians, and they knew Miss Severo. One lady said, I met her when I was 8 years old. I got chills. I still get chills when I say that. But it's just, conversations like that and the way people act and respond to you, it's just a really nice exercise. We really enjoy it, and we hope we can continue to do it. And Mr. Gray, thanks. That was a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. That's everyone who signed up to speak on this matter. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Yes, sir. You'll come and identify yourself, please, for the record.
Another team, if you will.
Teamwork is a good thing.
Richard and Becky Smith. We're on 228 Burbank. We also have a property on Antler, 206 Antler, which was my in-laws, which we inherited recently and passed away. We have had a short-term rental in San Antonio before we moved here, actually after we moved here. And I can kind of repeat the experience over here. We've had a wonderful time with the people that came. We were able to fix up our house and made just, spick and span with all the little amenities. We rented mostly to families, and we also had many repeat customers and formed some very meaningful relationships. So we hope to be able to do that again. We have to life situations and various circumstances in that business, but we do hope to be able to do it again. So we had a great experience.
Our property at 206 Amber Drive, where my dad passed, that house was a complete wreck, and we have worked very hard now for several years, making it very beautiful with this type of retirement income in mind. We live right around the corner on Berwick. That would be very convenient. I would like to point out just a couple of things. When we have our vacation rental over off of McCullough, I did not want the problem of parties and beer cans everywhere. So our ad was written to target families with young children. We were a homeschooling family at the time, so many of the people that rented from us were homeschooling families. 6, 8, 10 kids, actually one time, 14 children. Those families did not cause any disruption whatsoever. We have games, we have tricycles, we have puzzles. And so we totally avoided the problem of the teenage, the college crowd, parties, disturbing the neighbors. Our neighbors always said, if you ever want us to come and speak for you, you know, we can speak for the fact that you do not disrupt the neighborhood. Our yard was absolutely manicured. You couldn't find a weed anywhere because the pictures are online. That's what sells your property. So unfortunately, we had 2 rental houses on each side that were college students, and they actually ruined our short-term rental business because the college students one night had such a terrible party that the guests that were here for a golf tournament couldn't sleep, left bad reviews, and our business just tanked. So we realized it was kind of, that just wasn't the right neighborhood. Too many weedy, regular rentals in the neighborhood didn't look good. So we certainly hope to have people recognize, number one, families with children would be perfect renters because many families have well-behaved children, and we can attest to that. And so don't rule that out. And I don't know, the other thing about the yearly fire inspection, I'm just wondering about that because we had fire alarms, but nobody inspected our home in San Antonio. And I don't think any resident of Castle Hills has to have their house inspected now. So isn't that singling out a short-term rental? Or else let's just inspect all of our homes by the fire department. I'm just not sure if that's really needed. But I think it would be a wonderful asset to our city to allow some of us that are burdened with property taxes for 2 houses to have a way to make money and something to retire on.
Thank you both very much. I'm going to pass down this sheet of paper, and if y'all wouldn't mind signing in so that the city staff has a record for our public minutes on this, just so that we get everyone's name properly there. I appreciate that. Is there anybody else who would like to speak on this issue? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to close the public hearing portion of this at 8:47 p.m. I want to thank everybody who came to speak to this. I know we got to it a little bit later than we had anticipated. We're grateful for your input. Thank you very much for being here. And then we'll open this back up to members here for further discussion. Mr. Gray?
Yeah, what I'd like to start off with is one thing that is critical in what I learned in what the city of San Antonio did is gathering public input. And I don't feel that we have large representation just yet enough to where, I have a process I think I would like us to follow, but we need more input from the people that live in the city of Castle Hills to hear what they have to say. So I would recommend we not try to take a vote or anything this evening. I don't think we're ready for that. I think we need to have some type of session where, publish this and don't have very many people show up and want to hear pretty passionate about it. And I think that's wonderful. So I just recommend we get some input.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gray. Other comments or discussion on this?
Yeah, when we first started this discussion, I would, you know, we received, I'm sure most everybody else received input from one resident that had negative experience with the short-term rental. And we've gone back and forth about nuisance ordinance and things like that. But from hearing from other people and from the presentations, and as we discussed this, you know, originally I was against short-term rental. But I think Mike, the way of thinking is on 180 degrees. I think we should do this. I think it's warranted. And I think now it's a matter of how we're going to implement it. And I know Scott recommends the New Braunfels approach. I would recommend we just adopt San Antonio's approach, because we're here, and this gentleman put us in house thinking, well, I'm saying on video. We're here, and we're surrounded by San Antonio, and they've already done the legwork for us. And for consistency's sake, I would say we just adopt San Antonio's ordinances. That's my perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Friend. Mr. Gray, can I ask a question? We have the San Antonio City Ordinance, which I think everyone universally pretty much agrees is probably going to be the state standard. Your recommendation is New Braunfels. Can you share with us your thoughts on that and what the differences between the two might be that led you to that?
I had done an extensive review of the City of San Antonio ordinance prior to it being passed and subsequent to it being passed. And I'm in agreement. I think that I selected the City of New Braunfels because I think it's San Antonio light, but it's not exactly to the extent that the City of San Antonio ordinance is for short-term rentals. I would not be averse at all to us to consider that.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Mr.
Let me make a comment, because Mr. Booth, I think you said, I may have misunderstood you, but I think you said that your interpretation was that the short-term rental was for over 30 days. I think it's just the opposite, right? Is that what you said? I'm sorry, I maybe misunderstood you.
Well, I believe at the last meeting, y'all were leaning towards having it for 30 days and not anything less.
No, I think we were doing, I think it's up to 30 days and not over. I think if it goes over 30 days, then I guess something else makes sense. I think you were 180 degrees off on that. So just to clarify. And I don't know much about New Braunfels or the San Antonio, but you know, the San Antonio ordinance is multi pages. And I know we have lots of this multi pages, but I mean, it's like 20 pages. I couldn't get through it. I didn't have enough brain power to stick with it that long, so.
But you saw the New Braunfels is 4 pages.
Right.
And one of those pages you fill out, the other are drawings.
Right, so I don't know if we should adopt San Antonio or New Braunfels, which was better, but the San Antonio was about 20 pages long. 2 other quick comments you did a great presentation, and the city did too. We had more information for this than anything we've ever talked about, right? So somebody needs to be thanked, not me, it's other people, so thank you for this. The one you presented said we need to get recommended getting a floor map and a parking map. I swear I looked at this and I thought, what's the purpose of both of those? It looks to me like it's just extraneous work. I don't know why the city would need to know what the house plan looks like. And I don't know why the city would need to see what the house lot looks like. They've already got it, so I don't really see that those, if soon we get there at some point, I don't know why that just seems like paperwork to me.
Yeah, I have 2 responses to that, in my opinion. The first is having a plat of the house is a security issue, and it can be a police issue, and it can be a fire issue, in my opinion. If our fire police today had access to that when they're going out, it's had nothing to do with short-term rental at the moment. If they had all of ours, sitting there, then they know if they have to go in for a police matter or for an emergency response matter, I can expect to have that. I don't know the genesis of that. The parking, in my opinion, is to control parking. in my house, you can park maybe 6 cars in my driveway. And I think that's why they're saying that you're not gonna park outside, maybe on the street, but we already have an ordinance.
Right, that's my point, is we have a parking, there's parking regulations now, so for me to, anyway, I know I'm jumping ahead, but to supply a plan on the map and show where my parking lots are, where the driveways are, it doesn't seem to do any good.
I think less is more in some cases. I think that we should all review the city of San Antonio ordinance. I would recommend we review, and City Manager Rabbit has come up with a great amount of information, as did Ms. McLean. She did a lot of research, and I was able to have access to that through what we were providing. And I was really just kind of repeating some of that with some other information. I think we need to look at both and any others that make sense, and let's do what's right for Castle Hills. Right? San Antonio is way plus in my opinion, but I can't give you details of it. Let's do what makes sense. Let's keep making it easy on the homeowner so that they register their homes, they pay a small fee to offset the cost, and we utilize our police force and our nuisance ordinances to take care of any issues.
I absolutely agree with that. I tried to read the San Antonio ordinance this afternoon when I was sitting in Jim's restaurant, and I failed. It was too long. So that doesn't leave me a good taste in my mouth, but it's something.
Yeah, I made a suggestion, I didn't realize it was 20 pages. But it's a valid point. It's, over 1 million people in San Antonio, we're dealing with 4,000. But I would like to also make sure that the people that are renting their homes do have some skin in the game. Make sure that they're renting the right, and they do online, but I think we need to have some revenue generated to offset the kind of costs, and make sure that they do have some skin in the game, so we can have some confidence that we're getting good with it. And I appreciate everybody's hard work, and I know everybody's perspective.
What is our best mechanism to get public input?
So, if I can kind of try to lead us to that discussion a little bit, and let me say that as an informal, I feel like what I'm hearing is us beginning to have a consensus to move forward on this, without asking anyone to take a vote at this time. But if that is a correct interpretation of it, then I think that we have a due diligence function here to spend a little bit of time with that New Braunfels ordinance, with the San Antonio ordinance, to really absorb this and understand it so that we can come forward and start to bring forward, if you will, a sense of how we see this going directionally. My suggestion would be to accomplish that we take the time between now and our next regularly scheduled meeting to do that, and we bring back a discussion on that in our April meeting. If we feel that we're moving in a way that we see it coming together, I think that we need to make sure that we allocate ample opportunity for the public to become involved in this at a deeper level before we take any final vote on a recommendation to council. Keeping in mind that we have a whole ordinance here that we're supposed to get to council, not just short-term rentals, and we still have the home occupations thing to address too before we look at a final version of it. I think, Mr. Gray, to answer your question, that would be the way I would see it roll out, is for us to come back after we've done some more research on this. Perhaps we might also ask Ms. McLean, who has done a lot of research too, if she can be in attendance at the next meeting to provide any additional perspective, as well as any other public perspective that there might be. And again, if we think that we're coming close to where we sense what a ordinance or the verbiage might look like, that if we start to pull that together, then we look at the mechanisms to engage at a greater level of public hearing on it before we take any final action. So does that make sense, have concern, any, welcome your perspective on it. I think we all understand the importance of being very thoughtful in this approach and not moving so expeditiously that we either miss something in terms of verbiage or in terms of engaging the community to be a part of this process.
I think I'm in total agreement with you. Thank you for putting that together. My question is, when we're recommending at the next, would we have a zoning commission meeting, or would we, that would be the open platform and forum for everyone to speak to us? And if so, that means we should have something that the five of us might all be in consensus on at that point. Something as little as New Braunfels, but as great as San Antonio, that we would present as this is what we're thinking, right? So we'd already have some sense of, this is what we think, what do you think?
If we could get to that point at our next meeting, as well as taking care of the rest of the business that we need to with this ordinance holistically, then I would think in addition to any public input that we get at that meeting, that we would want to hold at least, and because that would probably take a whole meeting to get all that work done, then have at least one other meeting, which I guess would be the main meeting, to engage the public at that point, and if city staff or you all have recommendations on how further to engage the community, to get that information, that input there, and then to deliver a recommendation to council post-May meeting.
So April is to have public input to what we believe we're going to recommend.
So for us to have the discussion, see where we net out, if we believe we're close to consensus, solicit additional input on that from the public, complete the rest of the work that's required on the zoning ordinance that's before us holistically. So at that point, we would have, in theory, be very close to having the ordinance finalized. Use the May meeting then to have another public hearing in which the public can comment on short-term rentals or anything else that's in the ordinance before we take a formal final vote and send a recommendation to council. And of course, if I'm correct, Mr. Schnallman, council also would be required to have a public hearing on this as part of their meeting. Correct.
All right, so April meeting, public input, May meeting, I'm sorry.
Between now and the next meeting, look at New Braunfels, look at San Antonio, do any other due diligence that you would like to do, and you can bring that perspective back to our April meeting. We will have the discussion then of, do we feel that we are able to parse the verbiage that we think would be acceptable to us? If that's the case, right? You do that in April. And we would also have public input then, because anytime we discuss this, we're going to have a public session. Then we come back in May and we say, here's the whole ordinance. As it currently stands, before we take a final vote on a recommendation, public, do you have any additional input on any aspect of the ordinance, including short-term rentals? Based on that, we would assume that we would take a vote on the recommendation in May, and assuming that we reach consensus on that, deliver it then to the city council.
In the May hearing, we're soliciting public input. Is there some way that we can focus it just on the language of what I proposed language? I mean, I don't think we need to hear any more from people like, yeah, I think we're past.
Right.
Yeah, for short-term rental, I'm against short-term rental. Now we want to start getting the specific language. And so I would like to see some way of limiting the discussion to it as far as public input to just that language. I don't know if that's possible or not.
I don't know if it's possible or not, and I'm a little bit cautious to be that limiting, because I think that it's important to hear from the community. We may be predisposed at this point based on what we've heard to think one way, but I do think we have an obligation to open it up to hear from people. Their arguments may be persuasive. They may not impact the way you intend to vote on what our final language would be, but I don't think we should be limiting that way. And I think between now and our next meeting, I'd also like to have a discussion with city staff on what other tools might be available to us to effectively communicate to the public our interest in hearing from them on this.
I have a question, to Mr. Rackley. What mechanism did we utilize, did the city utilize to get notice out that there was going to be a hearing, a zoning meeting, and talking about short-term rentals?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, we put it on our website, we put it on Facebook, we put it on Nextdoor.
Okay.
I mean, those are our avenues to use, and we put a public notice in the Express News as well.
And I would challenge or encourage each of us to use the megaphone we have, if you will, to make sure that our neighbors are aware of this as well. That to do this right, we want to make sure that we're heard from the community as best we can and reflected on what they had to say. That we move quality language forward on this and give something to the council that we feel is a strong recommendation.
Where I'm having an issue, or maybe I misunderstand, is we have a month between now and the next meeting. Somebody's got to do the work, right? Somebody's got to do something in order to get it into a format, if we agree, of something in between New Braunfels and the city of San Antonio. So is that something we can work in the interim without violating any rules of public meetings or anything like that? Is that something we can come up so we have a straw man recommendation, whether it's me working or Mr. Rack, whoever it is, so we can move forward and have, because I wouldn't want to walk into public input session unless I know this is what they're trying to do. So I just want to have it more solid than what we're saying by the next meeting.
No, I understand what you're saying. Mr. Shaw, did you have a comment here?
Well, I'm a little confused. I thought, Mr. Isran, that the plan was for the April meeting to be the meeting where the commission renders an opinion or makes a preliminary decision about which direction to go, whether that's New Braunfels direction, San Antonio's direction, some blend, or something else. And that then during the period before the May meeting, the commission could ask staff or the city attorney to turn that consensus into a resolution of the zoning commission specific to short-term rentals. So that could then be put on the city website, marked draft, for public education. The public would be able to see it. Mr. Rabbit will put a link to it on the homepage of the website. And then hopefully you'll get the kind of feedback that you're looking for at the May meeting. And ultimately, hopefully at the May meeting, take some action.
Right. This is why Mr. Schnell's my spokesperson.
I would envision, like you take the city of San Antonio, 20-page ordinance, and just X out big sections of it, and then you say, well, I like this New Braunfels part, let's insert that here. So we'll have a Frankenstein's monster draft that can go forward.
Did that help answer your question?
It did, thank you.
And again, just keep in mind that, there's more than this one element that we want to get completed next month as well.
You gave us some pages from your Braunfels, but do we have the ordinance or do we just have the application?
I think that's just the application there. We can pull the ordinance and get it all.
Okay, yeah, we need to get the ordinance. We're going to come here.
It's 120 pages.
I can resend to the commission a copy of the San Antonio ordinance and the New Braunfels ordinance with the application. And keep in mind, San Antonio, again, there's other areas in the ordinance that covers with certain types, density, and other sort of restrictions. And going back to San Antonio being that the resources they have versus a city of our size for enforcement, administrative services related to the permit process as well.
What about Shamrock Park? Do they have anything like that there? The community right by that, it's, similar size.
We can check with Chavano Park, I'm not sure they have an ordinance though. And to Mr. Akin's point, one of the reasons that the San Antonio ordinance is so difficult to follow is because it amends a number of sections in the Unified Development Code. So without having the ability to see the entire code and then turn back to page 32 to see what that amendment was, and then move to page 63 to see what that amendment is, it really is very difficult to follow. Even for someone who writes these things, it was difficult to follow.
Something I was just reminded of when you were talking about the city of San Antonio code that I recall, something having to do with like on a block, one house on the end and one house on the end and something in the middle. But to me, I don't know the code that well, but it sounds like there's first come, first served.
Yeah, it was first come, first served. So I had literally had a private practice client who made sure that he was the first one to get to the door with his application, kind of like Mr. Smith, who was very, very quick in getting his done. My guy wanted to make sure that he got his house approved for short-term rental in San Antonio before anyone else did because of those maximum number per block in the city of San Antonio. That's the kind of provision that probably we don't need in a community like Castle Hills. And that's why, I think Mr. Gray thought that the New Braunfels ordinance might be a better fit, but I think it's prudent to look at both of those ordinances, and I'm certainly glad, and Mr. Rapley is glad to kind of reach out to someone in Chavano Park. I happen to know the mayor of Chavano Park personally, and Mr. Rapley knows the city manager. So we can certainly find out if they have an ordinance of this type and provide that as well to the commission.
Who does Mr. Rapley not know? Everywhere I go, I know.
Okay, just one last thing then for next time, if you would also review all the red lines of the entire ordinance so that you have the chance to ask any other questions, raise any other issues at next month's meeting. That would be good to try to get that one taken care of too. Are we good? Anything else said? Any questions? We're good? All right. Thank you all very much for your service. Again, thank you to everyone who was here tonight. We're grateful for your input. And we are adjourned at 9:11 p.m.